The bow of the Comanche warrior could send an arrow through a buffalo at 100 paces. The tomahawk of the Apache could split a man's skull with a single blow. The weapons of Native Americans weren't just tools. They were extensions of their spirit, their culture, and their will to survive in a world that was rapidly changing around them. Today on American Old West Tales, we're going to explore the ingenious and deadly arsenal that Native tribes wielded across the frontier. A Lakota warrior silhouetted against the dawn sky draws back his sinew bowstring with practiced strength. The tension builds until, with barely a whisper, the arrow flies, covering 200 yards before finding its mark in a distant buffalo. This wasn't just skill. This was survival art and spiritual practice wrapped into a single perfect moment. The bow and arrow was perhaps the most versatile and deadly weapon in the Native American arsenal. But make no mistake, these weren't crude sticks hastily bound together. The composite bows of tribes like the Comanche were engineering marvels, often crafted from layers of horn, sinew, and wood, creating a weapon with pull weights exceeding 100 pounds. This gave warriors the power to drive arrows through the thick hide of a buffalo or the metal breastplate of a cavalry soldier. The arrows themselves told stories of ingenuity. Northern Plains tribes fitted their arrows with barbed bone or stone points that would remain lodged in the wound, even if the shaft was removed. Desert tribes sometimes used hollow points that would whistle during flight, striking terror into enemies or signaling fellow warriors. And perhaps most feared were the poisoned arrows of certain tribes, dipped in mixtures of rattlesnake venom and putrefied animal blood. A wound from one meant almost certain death, even from the slightest scratch. But at closer quarters, it was the war club that brought swift and brutal force. Imagine the terrifying sight of an Iroquois warrior wielding a ball-headed club, carved from a single piece of maple or ironwood, its striking end weighted with a perfectly rounded stone. One blow could shatter bone and end a fight instantly. The prairie tribes often preferred the gunstock club, shaped like the stock of a musket, but far more deadly in close combat than early firearms. Some were adorned with brass tacks, metal blades, or decorated with painted symbols of past victories, a warrior's resume written in blood and paint. No discussion of native weapons would be complete without the tomahawk. These were sophisticated multi-tools of war and peace. The pipe tomahawk served as both a ceremonial smoking device and a lethal weapon. In the hands of a skilled warrior, a tomahawk could be thrown with deadly accuracy at 20 paces or wielded in lightning-fast strikes during hand-to-hand combat. Eastern woodland tribes developed throwing techniques that could make the tomahawk rotate precisely 1.5 times before embedding itself in a target. The knife, or more accurately knives, completed the warrior's personal arsenal. The Plains tribes often carried multiple blades, a smaller utility knife for everyday tasks, and a larger fighting knife for combat and hunting. Before metal trade goods became common, these knives were masterfully crafted from stone, bone, or obsidian, capable of an edge sharper than modern surgical steel. Some tribes fashioned unique curved knives that could slice in both directions with a single motion, a terrifying weapon in close-quarter fighting that could open devastating wounds. Spears and lances carried both practical and ceremonial significance. The mounted warriors of the plains wielded lances up to 14 feet long, allowing them to strike enemies while staying beyond the reach of return blows. These weren't just jabbing weapons. A skilled rider could use a lance with devastating effect at full gallop, driving the point through multiple layers of hide armor. The decorated lance of a warrior often told his life story through carved symbols, feathers, and scalp locks. A warrior's biography written on the shaft of his weapon. Each of these weapons required incredible skill to create and even more to master. Young men would spend years learning to craft their own weapons under the guidance of elders, and decades perfecting their use. In many tribes, a warrior's weapons were considered extensions of his own spirit, carefully protected, ritually purified, and given names like trusted companions. By the time most white settlers encountered native warriors in the Old West, These traditional weapons had been honed by thousands of years of development and use. What awaited the unprepared frontiersman wasn't primitive technology, but rather the refined tools of cultures that had mastered the art of war and hunting in North America long before the first Europeans set foot on the continent. Just as the landscapes of North America vary dramatically from coast to coast, the weapons of native peoples evolved to perfectly match their environments and way of life. A Comanche warrior riding the open plains wielded a very different arsenal than an Apache fighter navigating rugged mountain terrain, or a Cherokee defender protecting woodland territories. Great Plains, where mounted warriors of tribes like the Lakota, Comanche, and Blackfoot dominated. Here, the recurve bow reigned supreme, shorter than other bows to allow easy use from horseback, yet devastatingly powerful. The Comanche bow, often under 4 feet long, could drive an arrow completely through a buffalo at full gallop. These horsemen developed specialized quivers that could be quickly accessed while riding, and arrows with different heads for different purposes, broad cutting points for hunting, narrow piercing tips for warfare, and special lucky arrows reserved for crucial moments. The Plains tribes also perfected the war lance, transformed from a simple spear into a precision instrument of mounted combat. A Cheyenne warrior's coup stick, sometimes merely touching an enemy, with this decorated staff counted as a greater honor than killing him, demonstrated how weapons served cultural purposes beyond mere violence. The Plains war shield, made of hardened buffalo hide that could stop arrows and even deflect glancing bullet hits, was both practical protection and spiritual talisman, often painted with power symbols from vision quests. East to the dense woodlands where the Iroquois Confederacy, Shawnee, and other forest tribes developed weapons suited to close-quarter ambush tactics. Here, the tomahawk evolved into its most refined form. The throwing technique perfected by warriors like the Algonquin could hook the weapon around trees to strike enemies hiding behind cover. The ball-headed war club of the Northeast tribes could deliver crushing blows in forest fights, where there wasn't room to swing longer weapons. These woodland fighters developed special bark and hide armor that was surprisingly effective against arrows while allowing silent movement through dense undergrowth. In the Southwest, the Apache and Navajo crafted weapons suited to their harsh desert and mountain environment. The Apache developed a short bow that sacrificed some power for incredible accuracy, vital when hunting scarce game. Their war clubs often featured embedded stones or metal spikes, capable of puncturing the thick leather armor worn by Spanish conquistadors. The throwing stick, used with devastating effect for hunting rabbits and small game, could silently bring down food without alerting enemies to a warrior's position, crucial in a landscape where hiding places were scarce. Northwest coastal tribes like the Tlingit and Haida, with their abundance of wood resources, crafted enormous cedar war clubs and ceremonial daggers with intricate carvings. Their distinctive copper-bladed knives could be works of art as much as weapons. The Chinook tribes developed specialized harpoon systems that could bring down whales, yet were light enough to throw with astonishing accuracy. These regional adaptations weren't random. They represented generations of refinement. When the Ute tribe borrowed the bow design from their Comanche enemies, they didn't simply copy it. They modified the grip and draw weight to better suit their hunting needs. When Pueblo peoples faced mounted raiders, they developed specialized stone-tipped arrows designed to pierce the shields of attacking warriors. Perhaps most fascinating were the borderland tribes who lived between these regions, often combining weapon elements from different traditions. The Mandan people, situated at the crossroads of trade routes, carried war clubs with Great Lakes designs, used plains-style bows, and wielded knives with distinctive mountain tribe handles, a living museum of weapon diversity that reflected their position as traders and cultural brokers in the complex world of pre-reservation Native America. When European firearms first appeared in native hands, they weren't immediately the game changers many assume. Early matchlock and wheel-lock guns were notoriously unreliable, painfully slow to reload, and useless in rain or high winds. A skilled Comanche archer could lose 20 arrows in the time it took to fire and reload one of these primitive guns. Yet Native Americans recognized the psychological impact of these thundering weapons and their potential for evolution. The true transformation began around 1750 with the trade of more reliable flintlock muskets. The story of Chief Pontiac illustrates this pivotal moment perfectly. During his rebellion against British forces, Pontiac's warriors captured over 8 forts, not with bows, but with European flintlocks they had modified for their fighting style. They shortened barrels for maneuverability, lightened stocks for quick handling, and developed specialized powder measures that could be used on horseback. While European soldiers still followed rigid firing lines, native warriors were creating the first mobile firearms tactics. The Blackfoot and Crow became particularly adept gunsmiths, establishing their own repair shops and modification centers, where they would customize trade guns to their needs. They developed innovative solutions to common problems, replacing easily lost ramrods with ones attached by rawhide thongs, creating waterproof pouches for powder from buffalo bladders, and fashioning gun sights better suited for hunting specific game. A Blackfoot modified trade musket became so prized that it could be traded for multiple horses. The Sioux perfected what historians now call the fire discipline approach. Rather than having every warrior armed with a firearm, they strategically distributed rifles to certain warriors within a fighting unit. These designated marksmen would fire first, then fall back to reload, while others armed with traditional weapons rushed forward. This rotation created continuous pressure that confounded military forces trained in European tactics. Colonel Henry Carrington learned this lesson brutally during the Fetterman Massacre, when Sioux and Cheyenne warriors lured his men into a trap using precisely this mixed weapons approach. Perhaps most revolutionary was the marriage of firearms with horse culture, creating what historians call the horse gun complex. While European cavalry dismounted to fire their weapons, warriors of the Comanche and Kiowa learned to accurately fire from horseback, even while riding at full gallop. They would hang low on the opposite side of their racing horse, using the animal as a shield while firing underneath its neck, a technique that astonished and terrified their enemies. One Texas Ranger described a Comanche warrior as being able to empty a revolver into a playing card at 50 yards while his horse ran full speed. By the 1870s, many tribes had acquired repeating rifles, often before the U.S. Army units opposing them. The warriors who confronted Custer at Little Bighorn wielded more Winchester repeating rifles than the 7th Cavalry soldiers carried. The Nez Perce, during their famous fighting retreat toward Canada, repeatedly outgunned their pursuers with superior weapons and tactics, with Chief Joseph's band modifying their rifles to reduce muzzle flash for night fighting. Even as they embraced firearms, most tribes maintained their traditional weapons as well. The gun might claim the initial attack, but war clubs, lances, and knives still decided close combat. The Winchester might have changed warfare, but the bow never disappeared. It remained silent, deadly in rain or shine, and never needed bullets that might be impossible to replace far from trading posts. These weren't mere tools. They were sacred objects, family heirlooms, and artistic masterpieces that carried the spirits of their makers and wielders. A warrior's bow was never just a weapon. It was a living extension of himself. When a Cheyenne warrior crafted his bow, he didn't simply shape wood and sinew. He performed sacred rituals at each stage of creation. The selection of wood might come after a dream vision, the sinew from a buffalo known for its exceptional strength, and the glue rendered from a specific animal during a particular moon phase. The decorations adorning these weapons tell stories more personal and profound than any written history. A Kiowa warrior's lance wrapped with otter fur wasn't merely decorative. The otter represented speed and agility, qualities the warrior hoped would transfer to his actions in battle. The lightning pattern etched into an Apache warrior's knife blade wasn't random artistry, but a connection to powerful storm spirits that might guide his hand. The scalp locks hanging from a war club weren't gruesome trophies as often portrayed, but spiritual connections to defeated worthy opponents, whose courage and skills were believed to transfer to the new owner. Among the Lakota, a young man's first bow might be simple and unadorned, but as he proved himself in hunts and battles, his weapons would evolve to reflect his growing status. By the time a warrior reached council elder status, his ceremonial weapons might be carried only for symbolic purposes, living records of a lifetime of accomplishment. When reservation policies forced the surrender of weapons, many warriors experienced this not merely as military defeat, but as spiritual amputation. These weren't just tools being confiscated. They were material connections to ancestors, embodiments of personal and tribal histories, and physical manifestations of cultural identity that had evolved over countless generations. The echo of Native American weapon mastery reverberates through history far beyond the final conflicts of the frontier era. Their innovations fundamentally transformed warfare, hunting, and even modern military doctrine in ways many people never realize. Museums worldwide now showcase Native American weapons not merely as ethnographic curiosities, but as technological achievements. Perhaps the most profound legacy lies in how Native American weapon philosophy emphasized the connection between tool and user.